Is there a dichotomy that people like Hulu, as you say, is effectively an over-the-top service that may want to start to charge, and yet it has no relationship other than being an over-the-top service with the customer? Is this going to be another role for the gatekeeper, or is there going to have to be every man for himself in terms of, this is what I want to sell you, this is the limits I put on it in terms of the quality I can guarantee, and this is the price that reflects that?
So I think this is where service providers come into their own. Once you've got the infrastructure in place, you're going to have the likes of BT or OpenReach delivering the infrastructure, and then you're going to have service providers that are going to sit on top of that infrastructure. These service providers are going to have that relationship with the end consumer that says, if you're willing to pay for a package that needs a pipe from Hulu at any time, then it's going to be an add-on, a bolt-on. I think we're going to move into a world where consumers have to be educated that to get that, it's going to cost them more. Or else they must be happy to accept the service that comes available on the available bandwidth that they're getting across that
It's
pipe.
like the old question of who pays for the internet. I mean, who pays for that bandwidth?
But the reason for doing that via a service provider, it's not the service provider particularly wants to take control, but then he's in a position to actually deliver these preferences. So, going back to the idea of service preference, I as an individual service provider, doesn't matter who I am, can do that. If actually I'm one of several, then the whole preference model becomes very, very difficult.
So if you look at TV today, real kind of terrestrial TV, there's a hybrid between content that is generated by that TV channel and content that is licensed to that, either syndicated or produced by a production company that is sold to that channel. If you look at paid TV, HBO and other types of services are sold through different service providers, some that have dedicated channels so that they win some of the cable revenue, and some that's independent. I don't see over the top being any different. I think that there will be some content like YouTube that might come to all service providers, and I think some service providers may decide to either re-characterize that content and flow it in a proprietary channel or create their own.
But those service providers are no longer going to be territorial. So you could be anywhere and take your pick of these various...
Depends on whether you're a content service provider or a services service provider, or whether you're an infrastructure service provider. I think services infrastructure, from an infrastructure perspective, have to be local.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah,
but as a content provider who's currently tied into a particular distribution network, I could decide, no, I want to become universal.
Especially piracy is causing, NCIS, I was reading, is literally launched in the UK at the same time, a week later than it was in the US, just because of the piracy issue.
So one of the things that you're seeing in the US is service providers exploring combination services, where they can watch their, like Comcast as a service they're playing with, where TV everywhere, where if you're a Comcast subscriber, you can watch stuff. For example, for me, as I travel abroad, I can't watch Hulu here, even if I'm a subscriber there, right? And so
hopefully in November this year.
Okay, so I think there are interesting experiments going on this, because service providers do recognize that their customers are mobile and they want to keep those customers dedicated to the revenue stream that's flowing, right? So they want to make sure that they always remember the guy who's, providing
Well, it always annoys me that I'm a Sky Plus, I'm subscribed to Sky, and when I'm on business in Germany or somewhere else, I can't watch my football.
Let's talk about the interface with mobile and portable devices. Presumably this falls into the category again of at what level do we want to take control, or what level is it sensible to take control from a provider's point of view?
Yeah, this is more difficult. From a
The rest has been easy.
Oh, absolutely. From a pure network point of view, it's actually a lot easier because the mobile device is kind of going to be wirelessly attached. But there are some issues there. So, what flavour of wireless? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it Bluetooth? Is it 3G or whatever? I think there you are sort of getting into the realm. There's such a diversity of devices that I think the idea of taking control over those, I think, is going to be very difficult. And I think this is where things like the iPhone, particularly, are going to play an increasing role. And there's a limit to how much one could control those.
Neil?
Yeah,
it's good. I get first go, so this is good. Isn't it?
You are the service provider. I'm just the provider of software to you and your colleagues. Control. It's a big subject. Again, it goes back to the whole cloud model. I think we've got to profile the kind of consumers that we're dealing with, and there's one massive set now of, especially the younger generation, who don't want any control over that. They want to do what they want to do, and all the early technology adopter types. And then you get the other set, my parents, we always go back to it, who really don't want to do anything, who would rather have it controlled, and they'd rather pay a premium and pay for that service, and they'd rather pay £10 a month for that, somebody else to come and potentially come into their house and do it for them, as long as it's not me, because they live in Birmingham and I've got to drive there all the time. So, but they'd rather pay me to go buy petrol to go up there to go do it for them. So it's about paying. Are people prepared to pay for how much management of it? And I think as more devices come on the market, because there's a proliferation of devices, and I am always never want to go back to the 2002 bubble when we had all these web tablets and all these other devices that would be supposedly managing our lifestyle and our home, and it all crashed magnificently. I go back to constantly, it's an incremental adding on steps, like all the forums that on the hardware side, DLNA, they're sort of building blocks, and then we'll all look back in 5 years' time and go, weren't all those building blocks, they all came together, and now they're a set of a home network version. So I think it's building blocks is my key message there.
Yeah, so I think mobility is an interesting dilemma. Today, most mobile networks in the home are on an 802.11 type infrastructure. If you look at it from a wireless provider's perspective, the ultimate goal for them is to get a femtocell into the home, running LTE. One of the biggest problems that the wireless operators will face in the future is the building out of an LTE network that's going to compete in any way, shape or form with a fixed line infrastructure from a pure throughput perspective. And they see their path to that being the consumer has its own femtocell, which then allows the high bandwidth solutions not only within his home but also in the surround around that home. Managing that's going to be a bit of an issue, because one of the things that they want is to have the spillover effect from the home, which allows them to populate an area which would be far more costly with base stations, but it's getting the end consumer, who's ultimately thinks he's paying for that service, to be willing to open up that box so that other people can work on it. Then there comes the problem, if somebody's doing something illegal on that box, who's to blame? The consumer that has it or the person that's using it on the outside? Something that I want to touch on here from a home environment perspective, which I think is going to complicate this even more, is the cloud. I think as the cloud develops and becomes the place where all your services are kept, people are going to want to have the seamless connectivity from within the home to wherever they're attached to the network. So I think the home network is going to expand across the cloud over time. And that, I think, is going to become a bigger issue.
So it's not the home network anymore, it's my network.
It becomes your network. Yeah.
So I would look at connectivity between mobile devices and the home network in three ways. One is over Wi-Fi. The second is over cellular, and the third is or some other vehicle, and the third is over fixed connectivity. And I think wireless is easy. As David had said, you're going to have this hybrid network where every home is going to have Wi-Fi, and they will also have a wired network. And if your device is wireless, you're instantly connected to the wired infrastructure. If you look at the pure cell phone network today is not generally connected to your home network. Whether femtocells will ultimately take off or not, we'll have to see. But for sure, what many people do today is you have a USB interface, and you interface into some device that is connected to the network, and then you can flow your content that way.
You wanted to mention about mobile compatibility.
Yes, it's very interesting. This next versions of DLNA, have got major sections. So something like 30% of them are to deal with the mobile standards, so you can interact between the mobile and the set-top box and the other devices in the home. So regardless of whether it's a femtocell or type of device in the home that connects them directly, this is just over an IP connection, so it could be totally separate to, be over the 3G network or something, the LTE. And so really DLNA is trying to standardize. I mean, I mean, most companies, whether it's a set-top box company or a software company or a middleware company, that they're vendors, they're all showing proprietary ways of doing all this connectivity between the various different network pieces on the home. DLNA actually does, look at the standardization of that. And it's not just a kind of in-home network, it's also the outside of the home network.
And talk about personal networks that go over the cloud and go anywhere is something that will get content providers, and certainly premium content providers, worried, because they're worried about security and they're worried about piracy. How does the home network address their concerns, David?
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't in the sense, you can have sort of two views on security. The sort of classic view is it's end-to-end, so the security goes to the end device. So whether it's sort of DRM, conditional access or whatever, if you take that to the end of the device, you haven't got a problem. The problem, of course, comes when you actually say, well, let's take that all off and distribute stuff in the clear, and you can absolutely do that. Now, the home network can actually give you sort of various ways, so at the physical level, it can be encrypted at that level, and just in the same way that wireless is at the moment. You can actually put capabilities in the home network to make sort of simple eavesdropping actually a lot harder, and you can do that. But frankly, I think that's all you can do and all you should do. I think all the sort of higher value stuff, I think it's much more of a DRM and application layer thing. I don't think the home network can help you apart from preventing eavesdropping at the physical layer.
So on the software layer, there is this concept of DTCP/IP, which is the content protection layer, and we've deployed with an operator that effectively has broadcast video DVB-S coming into the set-top box, and then it's a basic Zapper box. It's got no DVR actually on the box, and what it does is it uses DLNA, and it actually routes so you press record on your EPG, and it puts that recording on a different hard disk of some kind, and so on this HDD hard disk, it then can store it, and it's still encrypted. So using the DLNA with the DTCP/IP, it stores it encrypted on that box, then brings it back and then it can play it on that actually original Zapper box. Right. So it's good for the operator because they can turn a Zapper box into a DVR without any hardware.
But inevitably, in the kind of transport over the network, it's not going to be a smart card-based solution because that'd be too expensive.
No, the smart card is sitting on the actual Zapper box, right. And so it's being encrypted using the key of that smart card, but it's being stored as an encryption, and it's brought back again, then decrypted.
But if you wanted to distribute that further to many devices in the home, or even take it with you, then smart card solutions, which are premium content providers would say the only totally secure or potentially totally secure, it's not really going to work.
No, I don't think so. I think we can't forget that today we have 1.whatever billion fixed line environments, of which maybe half of them will go to the digital home very, very quickly. But we're hoping to pass 4.6 billion mobile devices by the end of this year. The market sizes are just very, very different. And focusing on content being delivered to the home environment is cutting yourself out of potentially the bigger side of the market or the bigger chunk of the market. So naturally, I think users are going to be mobile and they're going to want to take that content with them. There are predictions that by 2020 we'll have 10 billion devices connected. Granted, there is a lot of M2M within that prediction, but there is another 3 billion users in the world that do not have a mobile device as yet. There is 3 billion users in China and India alone who don't necessarily have a fixed line environment. So we're going to have to solve this problem from a mobility perspective as well, not just a fixed line perspective. We also need to solve this from a perspective that says it's not just the big US and UK content providers that need to be part of this game, but it's the likes of the Hong Kong industry, it's the likes of the Indian film industry, the Chinese film industry, who are all much bigger players in their own individual rights than we know today. So it's how do we get these guys involved and make sure that we develop a common global standard, because people unfortunately don't like sitting in the same place.
So a global standard for sort of over network.
So let's look at it technically, and then let's look at it practically. Technically, you have a physical layer with G.hn that is completely encrypted and secure. You have a DLNA layer which is completely encrypted and secure, has DLNA and it has DRM and all of that. You go all the way through, secure, a customer has paid for this content, securely presented on a big screen TV that is video recorded with an HD camera, and all of that content is now effectively stolen, right? So you can do everything you can in a home network to create as much security as possible, and it can be captured and put onto anywhere you want, and there's not much that we in home networking can do about that, because it's not insecure in the home network. It's other technologies that render it insecure.
So it's when it starts to be sent out, or it's when it reaches an end device. This is when it becomes insecure.
We can all the way end to end. We can make it very secure, all the way to the presentation. But as soon as it's presented, it can lose its capture.
Does this mean the content industry's got to get used to a lot of shrinkage?
Well, I think content providers need to recognize that they need to sell down a value chain, and that they need to understand where they fit within that value chain. At the point of distribution, they will never have control, unfortunately.
I mean, it's about a hierarchy of security. So my first run network film stays on my 42-inch plasma. You know, the provider doesn't give me the option
Yeah,
to put it onto.
that is a possibility. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, David gave it an example of you can have absolute reliability at a impractical commercial viability. So you could strip search everyone who went into a theater and make sure that they don't have any capture device. This is not commercially viable, right? So you can
Or
do
socially
things.
acceptable.
Well, it might
Well, it
be.
depends on the theatre.
But so you have to have a practicality about these things.